Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the program. As always, I am absolutely thrilled that you are here. If you have never checked us out before, we are primarily an interview and a commentary-based podcast. On the studio line with me today, we have an interview, and Marc Defant is on the line. Marc, so glad that you are here. Welcome.
I appreciate you having me. Excited.
Oh, awesome. Excited. Good. I'm glad to hear that. Like I said today, Dr. Marc J. Defant is a professor of geology and geochemistry at the University of South Florida, whose work now spans both the physical sciences and evolutionary psychology. Interesting. He's published in top journals, including Nature, and has received funding from organizations like the National Science Foundation and National Geographic. In recent years, he's turned his attention to how ideology is shaping research in psychology and gender studies, publishing peer-reviewed critiques of social constructionism, the gender pay gap, and the scientific foundations of modern feminism. Now, that is a mouthful right there. He is also the author of the popular science book, Voyage of Discovery, From the Big Bang to the Ice Age, and has appeared on shows like the Joe Rogan Experience and the Dinesh D'Souza podcast. I hope I said that rightly. So you are, said it correctly. Coming from Joe Rogan and all those, obviously, you're well accomplished, but you finally hit the big time because you're here.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
You're on the Billy Dees Podcast, and today we're talking about what happens when activism collides with science and why evidence still matters. This encompasses a lot of things, in my opinion. Now, obviously, gender studies is the most recent thing to get caught up in this, but this is my opinion. Here's what happens. We start off with something that is reasonable, like the Me Too movement. Let's take the accusations that a woman has seriously. Let's not just dismiss them. Perfectly reasonable. Who would argue with that? Okay. And we could go down a whole sample of things, different causes. But what happens is different things start to get adopted into that movement. And typically what happens is the radicals start to take control of the narrative. Okay. And, with the whole thing with the gender studies, I am very much an individualist. I think people should, be able to live how they want to live. I don't want to have anyone discriminated against or bullied or anything like that. I think most Americans are probably in that camp. But somehow it turned into something else. And it just got more and more radical. And now, people are in trouble for saying you guys, which is a very general term when you're speaking to a group of people. And well, guys doesn't cover everything, and that's where it got. And I have a lot of friends in the LGBTQ community who frankly tell me, and they say it mostly privately, that it's harmed their cause in a lot of ways, because what was about, just normal rights, being able to live the way you want to live, not be in fear, has turned into something else. And I think if you could go back in time and talk to Abraham Lincoln and say, 150 years from now, presidential candidates are going to get asked, what is a woman? And they're going to get stumped. He would probably think that you're teasing him. Okay. So I'm not sure exactly where to start with this. You have an interesting background as a geologist. And I got to tell you, I don't think geologists get enough credit in terms of how we perceive our world. We always go to the astrophysicists. We always go to Newton and, Einstein and people like that. But I got to tell you, people like James Hutton and people like that, they made some simple observations. that at that time, let's say in the 1700s, it was generally considered that the Earth was 6,000 years old. And the geologists are the ones that said, well, if we look at what's going on here with the riverbed and other places, canyons and things like that, 6,000 years, if we go take the rate of what's happening there and go backwards, there's not enough time there for this structure to be there. Geologists, do you feel geologists get enough credit? Get enough respect?
I haven't given it much thought. I guess we do. I don't know. We're hardly doing well. I don't think we're doing that many exciting things in terms of what the public's interested in, like archaeologists do, or even you mentioned astronomers. But I do think that there's some interesting things out there that people do pay attention to. I know. One of the things I'm working on is on looks like a comet or some sort of airburst struck about 12,800 years ago at the Younger Dryas boundary, and may have even wiped out the megafauna. So that seems to have caught some attention from people. So yeah.
Well, awesome. How do you go from the volcanoes and things very interesting like that, to me anyway, to the culture wars? As a scientist, what has gone wrong in academia?
Well, I didn't get involved in the culture wars, and I didn't mean to get involved in the culture wars. I started out being fascinated by evolutionary psychology back in the 90s. I read a book called The Moral Animal by Robert Wright. And that got me all excited, and I started going in. I was teaching a science honors course at the time, which allowed me to, pretty much dabble in any kind of science. So I started teaching evolutionary psychology in that. And then from there, I kind of got so interested, I just kept reading everything I could get my hands on in evolutionary psychology until recently I felt like I could start writing research articles on it. And for the last few years, I've written some research articles. Those came about because of the criticism that evolutionary psychology was getting from the feminist movement. And I was shocked at first because it seemed so obvious to me, and it's backed up by so much data that I'm really surprised that the feminists were nixing this. And then I started reading more carefully and found that that they believe in something called social construction, which is this idea that culture is everything. You're born with a blank slate, you have no instincts, and everything that makes up you is due to culture. So if you're trans, it's due to culture. If you're masculine, it's due to culture. Whatever it happens to be, culture made you that way. And I don't honestly, I don't think that I wouldn't poo-poo culture. I think it is important.
Sure.
Things like money don't have any essence until they, until society recognizes it as something. So, yeah, I do think it's important, but ultimately, it seems almost indescribable to me that someone could deny what I see as evolutionary psychology. And so that's when I started being very critical of the left. Interestingly enough, the feminists, I see a lot in their literature about, this evolutionary psychology could really catch on because it is substantiated and seems very obvious, but we need to fight against this. And they give all the reasons why they should fight against it. So I think at some level they are admitting, that it is true, and they don't seem to like it because it doesn't fit their ideology, which is astonishing to me. I think we should all be about the truth in the university system, and we're getting more about politics all the time.
Yeah. When you say evolutionary psychology, just briefly for the layman out there, and myself included, when we think of evolution, we think of biology. different traits being passed on to another. Okay. What exactly is psychological evolution?
Well, good question. It's really the psychology part of it comes in. It's really all about biology. The beginners of the field were all biologists, and um, so they set the groundwork. E.O. Wilson at Harvard, and Richard Dawkins, I think he's at Oxford. Anyway, um, they set up evolutionary psychology, and they started seeing that our behaviors were related to nature and, in fact, evolution. And so this all began very slowly with a lot of early work in the late 60s and early 70s. And one of the things that you was very obvious was that it seemed like some of the things they were seeing out in nature were occurring within the human population. To get into this a little bit more, let me go back and talk to you a little bit about evolution of humans in general.
Sure.
If we go back about anywhere from 4 to 7 million years ago, we see fossils of upright walking humans, or not humans, but our ancestors. And so we know that somewhere around there, and DNA clocks substantiate this, that we started having people or primates that looked and acted a bit like what would make good ancestors. And so those critters out there had the brains of about this little bit bigger than a chimpanzee. Australopithecine is one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And it then, within 4 million years or so, evolved very, very quickly, geologically speaking, to have these giant brains that we walk around with. Nobody's really sure why that happened. Certainly, the savannah was the place where we evolved that large brain. But precisely what happened is a matter of huge debate. It could be related to a human's developing, or our ancestors developing language. It could be that, it was very important to understand social skills and whether people were lying, that kind of thing, the games people play. But ultimately, whatever the reason, it ended up creating a very large brain. And that large brain could not be born with full development. In other words, women have babies today with only 25% of the brain developed. And that changed everything for humans, because when that baby is born, it is totally helpless. And this is kind of unusual for the animal kingdom. If you take things like deer and moose, they come out, running pretty much. They're born, and within 10, 15 minutes, they're up running around. And you can see why. There are a lot of predators out there that prey on the young. And so if they're going to be successful and make it to old age, they better be able to run.
Sure.
This is probably not true of humans, although it was dangerous for humans out there, and they had to care for this individual. And what we see happening then is that we get a lot of input from males. Their input is required. This woman that has now had a baby is fairly helpless in terms of going out and getting food on her own. So what we see happening is women choosing men for their abilities to bring home the bacon. Is I guess the best way to say it. So they're choosing men that are good hunters. They're brave. They can protect the family, and they're good at bringing home resources. And there's something very, very interesting about that, because if you go to today and there's some wonderful studies that have been done, which have asked, something like 60,000 people all over the world. And there have been a couple of major studies like that, where they go out and ask people, what would you want in a spouse? And without a doubt, across all cultures, so we don't think that culture is having much of an impact on this because it's in all cultures. Women say that they prefer men that can bring home resources. And so women are choosing on the basis of resources, but men are choosing on the basis of beauty. That's their number one choice. Doesn't surprise men or women, I guess, for that matter. But men are out there looking for beauty. And is that shallow? I don't think it is, because beauty acts as a substitute for health and youth. So really what men are looking for is health and youth. And we find through numerous studies that people that we think of as beautiful, and by the way, this is also cross-cultural. The men in, for example, in Africa that find women beautiful would find the same women here beautiful that we would think are beautiful. And to get back to the health aspect, if you're beautiful, you're going to be you're going to have better genes. You're going to not have serious diseases throughout your life, or at least there's less of a chance of that happening. And it turns out that if you're beautiful, you fall right in the middle of the population in terms of what we like. And the best way to summarize that, when they started being able to overlay photographs of different people and create a composite of a number of people, they found that men and women were attracted to the person that, or the composite, rather than individuals. And we think this is because humans are trying to select in the middle of the bell curve where the most people exist. In other words, they're not looking for outliers because that's dangerous. Outliers can be statistically potentially risky. So that plays into, of course, supermodels are another story. They're really exemplify, they're 25-year-old women that look like 16-year-old girls. They have beautiful skin, they have, gorgeous hair and complexion and so on and so forth. But in general, beauty is really substituting for health and youth. And where the youth part comes in is that women, when they're in hunter-gatherer societies, and all this took place, all this selection process took place in hunter-gatherer societies, because at least for the 300,000 years that Homo sapiens have been on the planet, they have been living in hunter-gatherer society. Civilization is just too new, with 10,000 years or less, to have evolution playing much of a role. In the future, what we choose now may have an impact, but it certainly isn't having a much of an impact right now. So what we see then is this youth is the ability for men, if they choose right, they can have many more children than if they chose an older woman. And as you might imagine, that's the game plan. You have children to pass on your gene. At least nature wants us to have children to pass on our genes. And the more children you have, the better chance you have of passing on your genes. Now, we don't think of that as that important today, but our minds are still thinking about that. And we choose a lot of things on the basis of what developed and evolved in hunter-gatherer society. I don't want to get too carried away here. So, am I talking too much, or do you have any questions so far?
This is an interesting angle. No, you're fine. This is an interesting angle.
Okay.
Did you finish? Yeah, please finish your point. Go ahead.
Well, I didn't. You know what your audience likes, so I didn't want to get carried away there. But stop me if you'd like. My big, I guess my biggest complaint is that this is sort of the opposite of what the feminist movement is saying. And men, the claim is that we are out to suppress women, and that we I guess we have meetings on the weekends where we just try to determine. I've never been to one, but apparently that's what a feminists think we're doing on the weekends. And I would say that that's a complete misunderstanding about what's going on, evolutionary speaking. Women choose men, and men try to compete for women. It's not that men are trying to suppress women. We don't have a society where, like gorillas, where the males beat each other up and the winner takes all. We compete for the most beautiful women, that is the healthiest women and the youngest women, and everything else, is a toss up. And one way that we do that is also to have high standing among other men, because women like that. They like leaders. They like men with power. Not surprising. It's interesting. Women, even very accomplished women, choose not garbage collectors, not to rail against garbage collectors, but they're choosing high status men, that is, men that have well-paying jobs or high status in society. And that's a leftover from our evolution in hunter-gatherer society. And what is it about men that makes us different in our behaviors? And this is where the feminists would disagree. We have behaviors that we attribute to masculinity. So women have been selecting men with pretty much high testosterone. Men have 10 times more testosterone than women. Now, I admit that there's male competition also in that. Men probably have larger sizes than women to some extent, because they competed physically with each other in hunter-gatherer society. We don't do that so much today, but if you ever walked into a bar on the weekend, you might think twice about that, because men do compete, and they compete over the silliest things. But it's not about what they're arguing about. It's about who's got the higher status among the peers. It's interesting. I encourage my students to go to bars, not to drink, but just to watch what's going on in those bars, and how men don't go up to the street and get in a fight usually with other guys. They only get in fights with other guys usually, and when I'm talking about not necessarily physical fights, but arguments, they get in those arguments and fights in front of a lot of people typically. And those arguments could take place anywhere, but it's seemingly they always seem to take place in front of peers. And so that's often thought of as a way that males distinguish alpha males from what we might call beta males. And so it's a process, and women notice that. Now, women also compete with one another, but in very, very different ways, certainly not very physically. So ultimately, then, this testosterone makes men and their behavior very much different. As you probably know, men are much more violent than women. And in fact, men kill men much more than they kill women. They may abuse women, but they don't kill women very often, and for good reason, because that's who they're having their offspring with. So you get the competition of men. And I wanted to have your audience remember that, because that's an important aspect of all this. Men have behaviors that we call masculine, and women have behaviors that we call feminine. That's where we see estrogen working very strongly, and it gives women sort of this maternal instincts, if you will. And that feminine and masculine are the yin and yang of what attracts men and women to each other. If we didn't have ways to be attracted to each other, we might not ever have kids. So it's nature's way of saying, okay, this looks like a pretty good guy, or looks like a pretty good woman to marry. Ultimately, though, this goes right in the face of what the feminists are saying. The feminists are saying that these characteristics are created only by culture. That is, that we behave and have these masculine traits because of culture. And so they're on a mission to get men to behave more like women. And their idea is we can do that if everything's formed by culture, but we can't do it necessarily if it's all done by biology. Now, men are more violent than women, but there are some good things that come out of masculinity. So this toxic masculinity stuff is nonsense. Men are good protectors. They're good at going out and competing with other men to bring home resources. These are all things that society looks up to. So I really hate to see this attack on men that are masculine. And it seems to be just all around in the universities. There's an effort to feminize society and to get men to feel badly about being masculine, which confounds me.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the gist of it all.
I think it's fascinating, and I'm sure the audience appreciates it. And one of the things, we have a diversified set of programming here. We talk about all kinds of things, and that's kind of one of the reasons, why we have the audience that we do. So this is all good. I don't want to necessarily jump straight to the pay gap issue, but
no, you can go anywhere you want.
Okay, you touched on something in regard to hunter-gatherers, men being, the caretakers, men being, being the protectors, and so on and so forth. I think one of the reasons why men sometimes, and we could argue about whether it's a good thing or not, but men often intertwine their value as a man and probably as a human being with their job. And I don't think women necessarily do that. If the stock market crashed tomorrow, like worse than, the 1928 or 29, whatever it was worse than that. It would be mostly men, if not all men, jumping out of windows. It wouldn't be too many women. And we're the ones, men, are the ones that miss the soccer games. We're the ones that, don't go see our sick mother. We're the ones that are always at the office. Women typically don't sacrifice like that. That's a lot of times why sometimes men supposedly get ahead for, but it's at a great expense. It's at the expense of their well-being sometimes. So in that regard, I think there is some legitimacy to the fact that men sometimes can take on their role as a provider, but not to the point of, I either have to be successful or it's not worth living. I'm a total failure. I think that drive has hurt men. Do you care to comment on that?
I do. It's a great thought and a great comment. I honestly, I'm a hardworking man, and there is always, I think it can generally be said that women are interested in family and men are interested in their jobs. And of course, there's great overlap between the two. But I would concur, and I find it very, very difficult through my life to try to make a balance between the two. And yeah, I think you're right. Jobs do define men. Is that bad? Well, I think it can be if it destroys your marriage. And women can be demanding in that situation. Fortunately, I have a wonderful wife who is very forgiving when I spend too much time on the job.
Yeah,
but not all wives are that way, and I get it. Yeah. And men can it's a balancing act. It really is, and it takes a long time. At least for me, it took a long time. My attitude when I was younger was, well, my wife will understand because she knows I need to bring home all of this, resource. But sometimes they don't understand. And another thing that really impacts marriages is if and women don't like to admit this, but statistically it's true. If a man is making less money than the women, it can have a real impact on the man and also the woman. And women will say, oh, no, that doesn't bother me at all. But it comes out in many, many different ways. And if you look at the statistics, that's one of the major reasons why, families end up in divorce. Is it fair? No. But one thing I have learned about evolutionary psychology is that the world is pretty competitive and it's not very fair. And I hate to see women in the feminist movement trying to convince society that it's all hunky-dory out there and we just need to be more like women, because it is an extremely competitive world. And I think men recognize that a lot more than women, because they're the ones out there a lot of times on the front lines. Women tend, we'll get to the pay gap if you want, but women tend to be really risk adverse. They don't like risk.
Right.
Getting into 80-hour a week jobs is not something that women generally like, and they don't like that competition, and that impacts the pay gap right there. One of the reasons.
Yeah, all good points. This idea that the way you're presenting it about evolutionary psychology is very interesting.
Thank you.
Here's what I've said, and you can critique me as a professor and as an academic. You can critique me on this. Tell me how right I am, how wrong I am. When it comes to what people are attracted to, whether it be heterosexual sex, homosexual sex, and all the other variations thereof, here's how I kind of think that this has worked. One thing I am a little bit good at is physics and in terms of space and things like that. The Earth is about roughly 4.5, 4.6 billion years old, something like that. They tweak it every so often, and a lot of people think that life was a fairly recent event on planet Earth, but actually it started very quickly, probably after the first billion years or so. And for the vast majority of time that life existed on Earth, they were little microscopic pieces of life that were basically making little duplicates of each other. Okay. And this went on for several billion years. All right. Well, somewhere along the line, these microscopic life forms figured out a way to combine and take their best traits and put them into a new generation. And so let's say these microscopic life forms, the ones that lived longer, were able to do that more than once. So they had these traits that allowed them to live longer. They were stronger or whatever. And every generation started to improve. Now, this didn't necessarily happen instantly. However, it represented a monumental shift in the progress of life on Earth. There was an explosion of very large things. We went from that to amoebas to trilobites to fish, and all up the ladder. And that all pretty much happened in the last 500 or 600 million years. And we had dinosaurs and everything else. And all this came, not to be crude here, but it basically came from males and females having sex. Now, with that being said, as you mentioned recently, in the last 100,000 years, in the last 50,000 years, when human beings were intellectually developed enough that they were able to look up at the stars and ponder their own existence, they took some of that imagination and started applying it to the strongest urge that we have, which is to have sex. And it has to be strong, or quite frankly, we'll just sit on the TV and watch, sit on the couch and watch TV. Okay, we got to have this strong urge to have sex. So they're out in the fields, they're looking up, they're pondering their own existence, and they're thinking about sex. Cavemen, we know, produced erotica. And our imagination just got very creative with sex. And because of the fact that we're intellectual creatures, we do things like with erotica and other things that you just don't see that much in the animal kingdom. You do see it in primates a little bit. If they can do they can have some proclivities. But for the most part, that is something that our minds have really run with. And we've done a lot of things with it. And that's where you get a lot of these in my opinion, that's where a lot of these things have developed over the years. And if a person chooses to get pleasure in a way that doesn't necessarily engage in an activity that is going to result in a procreation, I don't necessarily think that's a big deal, but I think that's where a lot of it comes from. It's just that we have such a massive intellect. We have this huge brain growing, and there's this activity that we enjoy doing, and we're trying to make it more interesting. And I think that's where a lot of these variations come from. Now, am I totally off on that, or is there some truth to that?
Well, I don't think you said anything that was outrageous. No, not at all.
Okay.
No, in fact, everything you said about life is true. The earliest life goes back to about 3.8 billion years. You're absolutely right. It was single cell. And then somewhere around 600 or 700 million years ago, oxygen levels got very high in the oceans. And it's probably the reason that we started seeing multicellular life. And eventually that led to, sex, as you described. And ultimately, I guess we're the first creature that can elaborate, I guess, on that. So
Mhm.
yeah, I agree with all that.
Well, that is fantastic. Well, okay, though my week is made. Okay.
Well, you're assuming that I'm a good arbiter.
Well,
I may not be.
I think you are. Why biology still matters? What evolutionary psychology gets right about sex differences? And that I will throw to you, the expert.
What evolutionary psychology gets right?
Gets right about these sex differences that we have.
Well, I think
you touched on some.
Yeah, I think masculine and feminine is primarily hardwired, and that behavior is what I think so many people are against. I saw recently where the American Psychological Association, the largest psychological association in the world, has been pushing this idea that therapists, which are predominantly women, 85%, should treat men as if masculinity is bad. They didn't say it in so many words, but what they write is that men should be more like women and be less violent. But my point is that it's awful hard, to not be masculine. I mean, that's the way you were born. If you're that way. Now, if your proclivities are, in another direction, that's okay too. If you're feminine, women don't just want masculine men. A lot of women want feminine men. In fact, there's some evolutionary psychology that suggests that women the statistics would bear this up. Women tend to cheat with men that are very masculine, but marry men that are less masculine because they don't want the violence. They don't want the potential for violence, and they want to have children in an environment that is less violent. So maybe eventually, men might get less masculine. I don't know. Although 300,000 years is a long time to be selecting for men and have them change in a few years.
Yes.
I didn't really answer your question. I can delve into that a little bit more. I just feel like we shouldn't deny our innate natures, and we certainly shouldn't regret that we're masculine. I can remember a day when everybody was proud of being masculine. Not so much today, it seems, although I'm flustered by why.
Yeah, I would agree that this idea of toxic masculinity has hurt society as a whole. I think it's certainly made men behave differently. I hear a lot of studies where men won't approach women as much as they used to. or they don't hold doors open and do quote unquote romantic things anymore. And it's because those actions have, in a lot of cases, been villainized in our society. So I certainly feel that there's a part that's done harm, to be sure. By the same token, though, I do think like so many other things in life, when it comes to balance, I think that when we talk about things, I can hear feminists, and I don't want to pick on feminists, but left-leaning individuals, when you're talking about this psychology and the protectors and the warriors and all these other kind of things, they're going to say that that's very animalistic. They're going to say that it's very Neanderthal. And by the way, Neanderthals get a bad rap. They were actually pretty smart.
You're right. They had bigger brains than us.
Yes. But I would argue this. There's a lot of things that, in terms of our tendencies, that we really haven't progressed that far from. If you really want to analyze it, for example, going back 100,000, 150,000 years, when we talk about human beings using tools, what we're referring to a lot of times is weapons. And for a lot of that time, we've been taking, here again, a lot of our intellectualism and applying it to new and better improved ways to bash in each other's heads. And that's been going on for a long time. In terms of more recent civilization, all right, everybody says, okay, I got a smartphone here. Look how far we've come. Well, have we really? The concept of nations, about 5,000 years old. Strata in society, about 5,000 years old. Being rewarded with an afterlife, about 5,000 years old. I could go on with this, but you get my point. Right. I think there's a certain structure to the way we behave that is not going to change that quickly. Right. And I think there's nothing wrong with having modern social norms. There's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely. I don't think that we should go back to the caves. That's not what I'm getting at. But the idea that this has been made something ugly, we're animals, we're Neanderthals. We have to change our behavior. I think that approach by a lot on the left, not just the feminists, have done us a lot of harm. And I don't know if you want to comment on, I don't know if I'm off base on that, but that's kind of where I'm at with this.
I don't think you're off base. In fact, I was reminded when you were talking about when I was a young man and dating, I used to find out when I went to dinner with a woman, I would find out what that woman wanted for dinner, and then I would order for her. And I thought most women appreciated that back in the early 70s, late 60s. But I made that suggestion to my son when they were in high school, and they went out and the girls got mad at them. So things are changing, and I guess I always thought, well, if you're going to take charge, and they'll appreciate that, but apparently not so today.
Okay.
So I'd agree 100%. The comment you also made about evolutionary biology makes it seem so much like nature rather than, society, is very perplexing to me. I know exactly, or I think I know exactly what you mean, and that is that it reminds us of what is it? It reminds us that the jungle isn't that far away from us, and I think we shouldn't forget that.
No.
I always tell anybody I know that we're just some bad luck events from being homeless. So yeah.
Well, there's been some studies recently that showed that if the United States was attacked in a way where the power grids went down for an extended period of time, and I just don't mean like for a weekend, but like, let's say for the better part of a year, there was no power in the United States, there's a good part that most of the population would die during that time.
I'm not surprised at that. I have trouble making it a week when we have a hurricane.
When you think about it, I mean, there would be no communication. There would be no way, no heating in your house, no electricity.
Yep.
No way to preserve food, no way to it would be pretty bad. And and I think certain parts of the world might do better in that than not to question the resolve of the United States, but if you
I understand.
but if you let's say that they're in Israel, in Gaza, in Ukraine, and all these other places, these are battle hardened individuals. You can give them a bowl of soup and a pile of rocks, and they'll fight for a year. Okay, we here in the United States, we've never experienced that. Never experienced.
You're right.
And I don't know that we've been tested on that front. Not that I want us to be. But I don't think a lot of people really understand what it's like to be in a desperate situation where you're one step away from being in a cave, and it's survival of the fittest. And civilization has a way of masking that just a little bit, and how tenuous that can be. Let's wrap this up with modern views. Is there, when I hear systemic, I think of a system just as the word implies, that there is some sort of a structure that is keeping the success of women at a limit. Okay. I would probably have to say in this day and age, that is probably not true. Just the other day, there was a day dedicated to women physicians. The first one, I believe, in the United States was 1849. Now, she went up against a lot. She went up against a lot of stuff that were, when it came to getting her degree, when it came to starting a practice, when it came to getting taken seriously by other doctors, it was very difficult for her. I would have to say that type of a structure as a whole does not exist anymore. However, I would say that there are attitudes that some men have. So I wouldn't totally negate the idea that sometimes women can be in bad situations through no fault of their own, simply because they are a woman.
I agree.
And let me give you an example here. I'm of the age, as they say, I'm of the age where a lot of my contemporaries are telling me that they've experienced ageism. Okay. And I was talking to one here recently, and he made the comment that he sent this nasty email off to this place where he had an interview. And he said, well, let's just call this what it is. It's ageism and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, no, you didn't do that, did you? And he's like, oh, yes, I did. Why wouldn't I? What difference is it going to make? I might as well tell him that I know what's going on. All right. Well, I happened to know this guy when he was 30. And this guy was a pain in the ass when he was 30 years old. And I wouldn't have hired him then either. Okay. So it's sometimes hard to tell when it's ageism and when the fit just isn't right. And I understand that you can have that in the back of your mind. I can have it in the back of my mind as, someone who's of a certain age. I can see where women would have it in the back of their mind. Am I not getting this job because they just found out I'm pregnant? Or am I not getting this job because I'm not a good fit? It's very hard to separate that, and I do have empathy for that. So on those two fronts, is there a system? Is there a patriarchy that's keeping women down? But by the same token, should they be concerned at times and kind of watch their back?
Well, there's no doubt that there is some discrimination going on, I think, and has gone on. But I would just make the point that something I've experienced in my life. It used to be that if I would ask black friends, how do you guys want to be treated? Because their answer was, well, just treat us like you would everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've always tried to do that. But I remember some cases where they've misinterpreted, me treating them like everybody else as somehow that's racism. And that's kind of a hurtful thing, because you're just trying to interact with them the way you would with anybody else. And so I think it kind of hurts you from, continuing to interact when you're sort of afraid that, everything you do is going to be under. And I also think that if I were black, and I had people telling me all the time that there was systemic racism, and that you can't win because they're going to get you somehow, that I'd be on be looking out for it all the time. And it's kind of sad because there's this wall that prevents us all from treating each other as human beings, rather than, what's behind that? Why are you saying that or doing this? So yeah, I think that I just wish people were a little more interested in humor. We seem to have lost a lot of humor out there.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
And we can't laugh about things like we seemingly used to do. It's kind of sad, I think.
Yeah. Well, I have a theory about that too. I think that one of the reasons why the left in particular finds everything offensive and shuts a lot of comedy down is because comedy is actually a very powerful method of persuasion. If you and I have a disagreement,
yep,
and I can make you laugh about your position, I've made an inroad into your psyche and how you're thinking about that subject, and
I agree.
And they don't want that. So that's one of the reasons why everything is an outrage now. Yes. Everything's an outrage. So especially if it doesn't support their narrative, it's going to be some sort of an ism. So that's kind of the way I could talk to you about a lot of stuff. I could keep you on for a long time. I'd love to have you back.
Love to come back.
Yeah. Well, thank you. The book is Voyage of Discovery, From the Big Bang to the Ice Age. If people are interested in this book, where can they find it?
They can go to my website. They can purchase it there, or they can send me an email, whatever. I don't think about my book very much, but yeah, it's out there.
Good.
What the heck?
Okay, and here again, if you want to Google this fine guest we're having on today, here again, he's been on some of the biggest shows out there, Dr. Marc J. Defant, and the Marc is spelled with a C. So Marc J. Defant, Dr. Marc J. Defant, professor of geology and geochemistry at the University of South Florida. Thank you so much for being on the.
Thanks for having me. It's been great. Enjoyed talking to you.
It's been great talking to you. Great conversation. My name is Billy Dees, and you can find the Billy Dees Podcast pretty much anywhere podcasts are found. We are on all the major networks, have been so. The podcast in its current form is slightly over than 10 years old. So we've been around a while, and you can find us on all the major platforms. Do find us. If you're the social media type, you are so inclined to do that, you can find me on X, which at one time was Twitter, at Billy Dees. That's kind of like my social media home. It's kind of built for social media, combining podcasting because it's so trending and so real time. Do check me out there. Links are in my bio. If you find it, you can find me just about anywhere. Thank you so much for listening to our program today, and we will talk to you again very soon.
Thank you for listening to the Billy Dees Podcast. Follow Billy Dees on X, at Billy Dees, for updates about the program.
Do you listen to music or audiobooks on streaming devices such as Sonos or Amazon speakers? How about on your car sound system? If you use Spotify, Audible, or Amazon Music on any of these systems, you can also listen to the Billy Dees Podcast the same way. Billy and his team go the extra mile to make sure our podcasts sound as good or better than anything on the radio. Listening to the Billy Dees Podcast has never been easier. You literally just have to ask.